Warnings of further attacks. Pfizer approved for children aged 12 to 15, with the government confident everyone over 12 will have a shot by Christmas. Chinese censors leave Hong Kong filmmakers worried their movies may be banned even after being released. And medals on the track, the velodrome and in the pool for Australian Paralympians. You're watching The World. Hello there, I'm Yvonne Yong. A little later, lockdown pets but not enough vets. The UK struggles to keep up with surging pet ownership. There have been scenes of chaos in Kabul, with everyone's worst fears being realised. Twin suicide blasts at the city's airport, leaving at least 100 people dead, including 13 US service members. A terrorist group linked to ISIS has claimed responsibility, and still people are crowding the area, hoping to get passage out of the country. Many nations, however, including Australia, have decided it's just too risky to keep going. But despite the threat of more bomb attacks at the airport, the US and the UK are still flying people out of Afghanistan.
The threat is obviously going to grow the closer we get to leaving. I think in a generic form, the narrative is always going to be, as we leave, certain groups such as ISIS will want to stake a claim that they have driven out the US or the UK. And I think what I should make clear to your viewers is that we closed the Barons Hotel almost exactly on schedule. The explosion was horrendous, but it didn't hasten our departure. We were going last night, and that was always going to be once the US had decided that 31st of August was the final date.
Washington has vowed to hunt down and punish the terror cell responsible for the twin attacks, which have resulted in the deadliest day for US forces in Afghanistan in a decade. Tonight, planes have still been seen taking off from Kabul airport. Australian troops who were stationed there were evacuated just hours before the blasts, but Canberra is yet to confirm if Australians or any visa holders were injured or killed. Let's continue with Greg Jennett in Washington.
Slaughtered in a sewer. The dozens who didn't die instantly were plucked miserably from blood-infused water. The rest were ferried for care. Fanned out across the city, anything that had lightened the load would work. The bomber, strapped with explosives, had targeted the main entry point to the ringed Hamid Karzai airport at Abbey Gate, with the sewer canal and crowds thick with desperate Afghans alongside it. He approached the heavily guarded military checkpoint and detonated. A second bomber triggered his just down the road at the Baron Hotel, but it was the first that proved most deadly. America's top regional commander bore grim news of his fallen.
The attack on the Abbey Gate was followed by a number of ISIS gunmen who opened fire on civilians and military forces. This is close-up work.
Even after the carnage, threats were still in close.
We have other active threat streams, extremely active threat stream against the airfield.
He blamed Islamic State's Afghan offshoot, and ISIS-K was proud to claim it, praising the bomber for his martyrdom explosion against American forces in collaboration with the Taliban militia, who'd let hundreds of translators and collaborators get out of the country. It managed to make the Taliban sound reasonable.
Targeting innocent civilians is an act of terrorism that has to be condemned by the entire world.
Reverent, quavering, but unbowed.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
Joe Biden had emerged from a day of talks with commanders to stick rigidly to his withdrawal deadline.
Here's what you need to know. These ISIS terrorists will not win. We will rescue the Americans. We will get our Afghan allies, and our mission will go on. America will not be intimidated.
Some evacuations are ongoing, those slowing sharply, and few linger by the wall in hope any longer. now that terrorism's dark shadow cloaks Kabul once more.
The bloodshed near the end draws to a close, an horrific war that's already cost the US-led coalition dearly. But it's Joe Biden who directed its final phase who'll be held to account for it. Little consolation that the intelligence picked it or that the final foreign forces will be out next Tuesday. History will still record these latest US war dead under this president's name. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Washington.
Australia has now ended its military evacuation mission from Afghanistan while condemning the Kabul terror attack as evil. Tonight, an unknown number of Australians and Afghan visa holders are stuck in the war-torn country, facing growing danger and limited options to escape. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
Bloodshed and tragedy mark the end of Australia's longest ever military deployment.
Australia condemns the evil, the calculated and inhuman attacks.
Hours earlier, amid growing security fears, the last RAAF flight left the Afghan capital, delivering the final 70 evacuees to the safety of an Australian military base in the Middle East.
Over these 9 days, we have successfully evacuated some 4,100 people from one of the most dangerous places on earth.
It's not known precisely how many were unable to board Australia's evacuation flights.
We know that this is a very distressing situation for Australians still in Kabul, for people with visas and for family and friends who are here in Australia.
It is, I think, a legitimate decision for a government of the day to make decisions as to the safety of Australian personnel.
This Adelaide mother is one of many facing deep uncertainty and fear, unsure if she'll ever see her husband again.
I want to save him. I want you to save him and bring him back to her children, to his children.
The sudden end to the massive airlift operation brings to a close a 20-year Afghanistan mission, which began for this country after another foreign terror attack.
They will go with our best wishes, our prayers for a safe return.
The lengthy war would eventually claim the lives of 41 Australian soldiers. For Australia and allies like the United States, the Kabul attack shows the very real threat still posed by Islamic State and its various worldwide splinter groups. Invading Afghanistan and removing the Taliban was supposed to stop that country again becoming a safe haven for terrorists. The irony for the West is it may now need to work with its longtime enemy to help combat ISIS. The group claiming responsibility call themselves ISIS-K, after Khorasan, a historical region covering modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan and Central Asia.
This ISIS-K, are they even Afghan? Where are they coming from? There are more questions I have than answers, but all I know is that the bloodshed is not going to stop.
And again, the Afghan people will pay a heavy price. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Dozens of school children abducted from an Islamic school in northern Nigeria 3 months ago have reportedly been released. Footage filmed early on Friday morning showed a large number of children who had been released eating together. 136 pupils were seized by gunmen demanding a ransom in June, but 6 have reportedly died. Armed groups carrying out kidnapping for ransom are blamed for a series of raids on schools in northern Nigeria in recent months, abducting more than 1,000 students since December. All of New Zealand will remain in lockdown until at least Tuesday, following a record jump in COVID cases. 70 new infections were reported in Auckland, taking the country's total to almost 350. It means the city is likely to face another 2-week extension of the strongest level 4 restrictions.
We're the most at threat here, obviously with all these cases around.
It's a necessity evil, I would say.
Unless a lot more people are vaccinated, it's pretty crazy to let everyone back out.
It's better news for the country south of Auckland, where rules are set to be downgraded after Tuesday. There have been no community cases reported in the entire South Island since November. Children aged 12 to 15 will be eligible for a Pfizer vaccine within weeks, with parents being promised it'll help bring an end to homeschooling. The federal government announced the expansion of the rollout today, confident it'll have enough supply to offer all Australians over 12 a shot by Christmas. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
Only a pandemic could make vaccines the most sought-after teenage accessory.
It has been something that my friends have been talking about, and I've been wanting it to get it for a long time.
Isabella won't have to wait much longer. For the 1.2 million kids aged 12 to 15, Pfizer bookings will open from the 13th of September, first at GP clinics to encourage families to get vaccinated together, followed by school vaccination programs before the end of Term 4.
We're in a position to ensure that all children will be able to do so this year.
It follows advice from the expert group ATAGI, which found vaccinating children will help reduce COVID transmission and reduce disruption to their education, noting long stints of homeschooling can have considerable psychosocial and educational impacts on children.
It's not only music to my ears, but the kids want to go back to school as well. So you want to go back to school, don't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
They're the benefits, but there are some extremely rare side effects. Pfizer's been linked to heart inflammation in mainly young men, but the cases have been mild and treatable.
ATAGI has done their due diligence in relation to that, looking at risk and benefit, and has fallen on the side of benefit.
With access expanded, the Prime Minister is facing calls to expand the national vaccine targets underpinning the COVID exit strategy.
Once 12 to 15-year-olds become eligible for vaccines, they should be counted as part of the national plan.
There is no recommendation before us that it should be included in that target.
On current trends, 70% of adults nationally could be fully vaccinated by November, the first key target of the plan when we're being promised fewer lockdowns and greater freedoms. Precisely what freedoms remains unclear, but the Prime Minister insists the reopening will be gradual and that some restrictions will remain even once the vaccine thresholds have been reached.
It's a soft opening period, not a big opening period.
The states will move at their own pace, but they'll all confront the same brutal reality.
Every state is going to have to come to terms with living with COVID.
Her state sooner than she'd hoped. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Returning to the deadly attack in Kabul airport, Washington has vowed to hunt down and punish the terror cell responsible for the twin bombings, which have resulted in the deadliest day for US forces in Afghanistan in a decade. For more on the US response, we're now joined by the Voice of America's White House Bureau Chief, Steve Herman. Now, Steve, would this be regarded as the worst day of the Biden presidency so far?
I don't think there's any doubt about that, Yvonne. And throughout the White House yesterday, there really was a very somber mood at the same time that the reports were coming in just about how bad this was. We had a huge thunderstorm which rocked the White House, sort of adding to the real dark mood that was across the White House on Thursday.
Yet Joe Biden vows to continue the evacuation effort, even amid those warnings of more similar attacks.
Yes, they're saying that there is the possibility of more attacks, and they are going to continue for the next few days to get out as many Americans, green card holders, allies, and other vulnerable Afghans as they possibly can. Of course, there's no way they're going to get out everybody that wants to get out or needs to get out. And there was an acknowledgement from basically both the president and the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, about that on Thursday.
And this is also as other countries, such as Australia, start to pull out and cease their evacuation efforts.
Yes, the United States is beginning what they call the retrograde. There were some explosions after the bombing on Thursday, and those were, according to our sources, the U.S. military at the base blowing up some of its own equipment and ammunition, starting this process that will take some days to get out of there. They're not going to tell us exactly when the last flight out is going to be.
And Steve, what more do we know about the suicide bombers and how they managed to carry out the attacks?
Yes, they apparently, according to the White House and U.S. military officials, were able to pass through some Taliban checkpoints. And as you know, the group ISIS-K has claimed responsibility for this. The U.S. military and the intelligence community is being very blunt that they have the capabilities to carry out more and perhaps worse attacks, but saying that they do not believe that ISIS-K has the ability to shoot down any of the planes, although there have been shots fired apparently at some of these planes either landing or taking off.
What has the American public's reaction been to the Biden administration's handling of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan so far?
Well, there are very mixed views about that. Of course, the majority of people have said that they wanted the United States to pull out, but they also feel that the country has an obligation to take care of those who fought alongside American troops. Now, a lot of the country still digesting what happened with the deaths of 13 U.S. service members, and we can expect President Biden will change from sort of commander-in-chief to mourner-in-chief in the days ahead, as we have ceremonies and funerals for these service personnel. There are some members of Congress, Republicans from the opposition party, saying that President Biden no longer can be commander-in-chief and has to resign as a result of this. The White House press secretary Jen Psaki saying this is no time for politics.
Steve Herman, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The New South Wales government has revealed its plan to get students back into schools. A staggered return will begin from October the 25th, with HSC exams also postponed by 3 weeks. Vaccinations for all school staff will be mandatory, and they'll be given priority access to vaccines. The state reported 882 new COVID cases and 2 deaths today. Education officials are saying the return to school will depend on how many infections there are in certain areas.
For many families, the pressure of learning in lockdown has made life a bit tense. So this mum pitched a creative solution, setting up a classroom in the backyard.
When Gladys announced that it was going to be another month at least in lockdown, it was like, okay, what can we do to make this more fun? Up went the 10.
Under the new plan, Kelly Darley's younger son will be among the first back to school if COVID cases in their area drop substantially.
There's a level of relief that there's a plan, but there's just a level of worry still about protecting your kids and your family.
Providing some protection, a no jab, no job policy. School staff must soon have both shots.
And we'll be supporting them and assisting them by having a special day for teachers.
We have almost 70% of our workforce having already received 1 dose of the vaccination and close to 40% being double dosed already, which is really encouraging.
The Teachers Union says until now, calls to prioritise its members have fallen on deaf ears.
Here we are, 3 weeks before the end of term, and we still have very large numbers of teachers who are experiencing difficulties to access the vaccine.
This plan is dependent on the caseload in each LGA, so if a region comes out of lockdown, kids can go back to school straight away. But if case numbers are still too high in an area by October and November, home learning will continue. And that's a real possibility in some of the current councils of concern.
What is the criteria for those students to return back to school?
So the first threshold will be that they are no longer classified as an LGA of concern.
The HSC will go ahead, albeit a bit late.
You will be able to do written exams, that you will be able to get an ATAR. If you want to go to university, you will be able to do that.
The principal of St Clair's in Blacktown believes students in the worst hit areas are severely disadvantaged.
Some concession has to be made for the experiences that these students are going through. Anyone who's worked with students under these conditions, I don't think they'd have any doubt in saying it's just not fair.
pupils are looking for the positives. Alyssa Dang is thankful for the extra time to study.
I think what I've learned is that you just got to adapt, and I feel like that's like a good skill in the future.
There's no doubt the class of 2021 will be graduating with honours in resilience. Kathleen Calderwood, ABC News, Sydney.
Victoria has recorded 79 new COVID cases as the virus continues to spread through West Melbourne and the regional city of Shepparton. The state is expected to hit the 5 million vaccine mark early next week. Vaccine eligibility was expanded in Victoria this week to include 16 to 39-year-olds, and more than 440,000 new Pfizer bookings were snapped up in 2 days.
Hesitancy is not a problem with Victorians in those age groups who want to come forward and get vaccinated. And the other thing it shows is that we need more supply.
The outbreak in Shepparton has reached 79 cases, with a third of the residents in isolation. New cases have also emerged in Geelong and Echuca. 2 truck drivers from New South Wales have tested positive to COVID-19 in Western Australia. The men, aged 29 and 23, travelled to WA via Victoria and South Australia. The WA Premier says they've had very little contact with the public and no lockdown restrictions are being triggered at this stage.
Full contact tracing is currently underway. All close contacts will be quarantined and a full list of potential exposure sites will be published ASAP.
The pair are now in quarantine at the Western Hotel with mild symptoms. With children as young as 12 now to be included in the Pfizer vaccine rollout in Australia, kids in other countries are also returning to school after months or even a year of online learning. But that's coinciding with outbreaks of the Delta variant, leading to higher infection numbers among children. Oksana Pizik is a senior teaching fellow in the School of Pharmacy at University College London and joins me live from Geneva. Oksana, how does it work in the UK? How will students be kept safe once they return next month for the start of the school year?
Well, there's been a lot of criticism around the approach the UK has taken to keep children safe in schools, and that's because very little mitigation measures have been put in place. So there has been no requirements for improved ventilation, no use of air purifiers, etc., things like HEPA filters, which we do see being used in the United States in places like New York. Also, there have been all restrictions removed around the need for wearing face masks indoors, and that has really been left to individual employees and organizations to decide for themselves whether they will continue with layered protection or not. So again, there's a lot of discrepancy about how institutions might operate in this particular phase of the pandemic, particularly as the vaccine in the UK has not been made available for 12 to 15-year-olds or those under 12 as well, unlike many other countries. So if we look at Canada, the US, Israel, Japan, other European nations. So we will see in September, there's a bit of this winging it approach in terms of no mitigation measures and no access to vaccine.
Not even testing? The children won't need to be tested? And do you think that would be an effective tool, using swab tests?
Well, swab tests aren't perfect. We know that they aren't the most accurate, but if we continue with weekly testing, that will help to catch cases quickly. However, in response to many students, almost entire classes, having to isolate and bubbles falling apart, the UK government is sort of pushing forward with a no rules or restrictions approach. So the need for testing is clear, at least at a weekly basis.
And you mentioned vaccines as well. Why are UK public health officials reluctant or being particularly cautious in recommending the vaccine for children?
So in the UK, the JCVI is the committee that decides, puts forward the recommendations. So the MHRA has approved the use of these vaccines in teens, and they have said that they are taking this decision out of an abundance of caution. It's really a wait-and-see approach, but In the meantime, we know that this delay doesn't come without cost. There has been, in terms of cases linked to long COVID, since June 4th, about between 9,000 to 18,000 cases, 9,000 to 18,000 cases of kids that have had complications, and over 1,000 hospitalizations just from June alone. So there is a clear cost to kids if adults don't act responsibly on ensuring access. So a decision is being discussed, and NHS England has been told to prepare for that eventuality, but that is just at a planning stage. So there is no confirmation that this age group will be eligible in the UK for these vaccines.
And taking all of these factors into consideration, how do you think the COVID cases and hospitalisation numbers will fare in the coming months?
So we do risk seeing a back-to-school surge. We certainly saw that with the Delta wave in the United States. There had been an increase in the number of pediatric ICU admissions. In the UK, that trend has not been as mirrored, but we do know that because there is a large proportion of the population that, at least in terms of the non-adult population that hasn't been vaccinated, this can cause pressure on the wider health system, because we already have seen a 10 times increase in hospitalizations at the same time this year than last year. So cases are holding up steady, about 37,000 cases a day. Hospitalization rates are high. And we're going to see return from travel, coming back to school, all at the same time. So this is something that, again, will be a crunch period when it looks to how it will spread across the country.
Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to the US. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the US planning to administer booster shots for those who were already vaccinated. Given so many in other countries haven't even received their first or second doses, like the WHO points out, what do you make of that?
Well, I agree with the WHO, and they've called for a moratorium on all booster shots, for at least to get at least 10% of other low-income countries to get their very first dose. We know that the vaccine is doing its job in terms of preventing severe disease and hospitalizations. However, with Delta, there is more transmissibility risk. So it is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to be at this stage so early, 6 months after the last dose, offering another jab. I think maybe there could be a need for it down the line, but the priority really should be for other countries, the majority of the world, to get their first dose, because these are often very highly populated areas in very densely populated regions. So it's sort of these perfect conditions with very high transmission for other variants that could be worse than Delta to emerge. So we're really boosting the chances of a virus developing a new variant by giving booster jabs, rather than offering layered protection. So again, looking at for people who are at more risk, who could benefit for additional protection, even with 2 jabs, to still be using face masks and taking other precautions. So I would agree with the WHO that I think that at this stage we need to be boosting global production, ensure that there's enough vaccine being made. And there could be other treatments available, monoclonal antibodies, et cetera, for those that need a top up on their immune response. But on the whole, I think it's too early. The studies there are just not strong enough. The evidence isn't strong enough to really support this policy. It's a just in case policy rather than something that confers immediate benefit and need.
Oksana Pizik, great to get your thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The world's largest active wooden ship has docked in Sweden ahead of a journey to Asia. The ship is a 60-metre-long full-size replica of an 18th century vessel owned by the East India Trading Company that sank in 1745. The trip will include stops in London, Lisbon, Athens, Alexandria, Singapore and Shanghai. A 43 million year old fossil has been unearthed in Egypt that helps trace the transition of whales from land to sea. The whale belongs to a group from the middle of that period that could both swim and walk on land. It was an estimated 3 metres long and weighed about 600 kilograms. Researchers found its skull, lower jaw, 2 vertebrae and parts of the rib cage. It's the most primitive fossil of its kind found in Africa. For many, the loneliness that comes with lockdowns has been reason enough to finally take the plunge and buy a pet. But in the UK, veterinarians are struggling to keep up with the surge in pet ownership to the point where even urgent care has been affected. Manny Sigas reports.
Paige Balmy recently noticed her dog Bella was having issues with her eyes, but getting a face-to-face appointment with her local vet was proving a challenge.
The vet that she's registered with were only doing telephone appointments, which was a bit pointless because she really needed to be seen by someone. And I couldn't get one anyway for like another week. I was just quite worried about, the complications of leaving it for so long.
Throughout the world, the pandemic has led to a spike in people getting pets. But Britain's decision to leave the EU means the number of veterinarians it lets in from overseas has been slashed. Now, pets and their owners have to wait longer for routine appointments, and test results can take even more time.
We've seen millions more animals becoming pets in the past year due to the people having increased time at home. Unfortunately, we're unable to meet that current demand for pet services. Also, COVID's got the inevitable impact with people having to self-isolate.
Before Brexit, the UK was letting in around 95 vets per month. Now it's less than a third of that. Pet food manufacturers say the UK's dog population has grown by 3 million, while cats are up 5 million. Training to become a vet takes around 5 years, so for at least the short term, waiting for remote appointments will be here to stay.
It is very limited what we can diagnose, so it's more about peace of mind and determining whether they do need to be seen in person.
Animal lovers are still able to visit London Zoo, albeit with restrictions. Staff have been conducting the facility's annual weigh-in, where over 20,000 animals are measured and, in many cases, coaxed onto scales. By monitoring their vital statistics, they ensure that all creatures, great and small, are developing as they should. Manny Tsigas, ABC News.
To what in the world now, and one of the strangest collaborations of 2021. This is Fortnite, one of the biggest games in the world, which has branched out from Battle Royale mayhem to feature concerts and movie tie-ins. But it's the latest crossover that's raised more than a few eyebrows as players head inside a virtual Washington, D.C. to watch Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. March Through Time recreates the Lincoln Memorial and the National Mall, where Martin Luther King gave his famous speech in 1963. Those behind it say it's a chance to ensure his legacy remains relevant to a new generation, but some fans have questioned the move, and Dr. King's family have sought to distance themselves from it. You're watching The World, the top stories we're following tonight. The United States has vowed revenge after a terrorist group linked to ISIS carries out twin suicide blasts at Kabul airport, killing at least 90 people, including 13 US service members. Children aged 12 to 15 will be eligible for a Pfizer vaccine within weeks, with parents being promised it'll help bring an end to homeschooling. And Hong Kong's film industry is bracing itself as authorities threaten to amend a law that would allow them to ban movies they see as a threat to national security. At least